Good evening, I'm Billy, I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990. My home group is the Tell It Like It Is group in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. It's really good to be here. I say all the time, whenever I'm at this podium, this particular time of year in Las Vegas, that the rest of AA is just glad all us lunatics are out of town. They're glad that they all sent us someplace before Christmas so that they can have a break from listening to us. But I am grateful to be here. Quickly, I'll just address two things. I asked that section to be read because that's one of my favorite sections, but also because one friend of mine who passed away this week, if you're from Texas, you might have ran into Bill S. And Bill loved Alcoholics Anonymous, and he was born with a lot of challenges. And he loved Alcoholics Anonymous. His clothes were always rumpled. He was such an odd character. It was hard to kind of really, I got to know him over a lot of years. But he had a ridiculous computer for a brain, even though if you were standing next to him, you'd think, well, God, this guy seems a little odd and a little off. But if he said to you, what is your sobriety date? And you said it, he would say, that was a Tuesday. And he would just walk away. Or if you said, my sobriety date is November 27th, 1970, whatever, he would say, that was a Thursday. And then as he was walking away, he would say, that was Thanksgiving. His brain, but he died this week, unfortunately. And my friend Gene died. Lee knew Gene very well. Gene was a diehard, ass-kicking member of Alcoholics Anonymous who went to Alina Lodge in New Jersey. She loved Alcoholics Anonymous. The first time I paid attention to Gene in a meeting, she was one of those people who every once in a while would say something where people's heads would just swivel around, right? And she had a gift with working with women in the program for sure. I remember one time I was at a meeting, I was much younger, and somebody was complaining about relationships and a couple other things, and I remember Jean, and she said, no one loves the unemployed, hot felon painter like the alcoholic woman. That was her statement, and then she just shut up. She said, I pass. That was her answer to what everyone else in the meeting had just shared. But she had a gift, boy. I want to thank the previous speakers. I am going to write a letter to GSO, and if you were here for this morning, I am going to ask for our service manual to be called the Cage Manual. I think that should be the new name of the service manual for sure. But I'm here to talk about step one from a lot of different angles. There's my step one. There's a step one that I thought I had before I knew what step one was. There's maybe the more important step one, the one in working with others, that's all the way at the end of the first 103 pages of the big book. The step one when you're working with someone else that is critical to saving someone's life. I consider myself a low-bottom drunk, but I don't think you have to be a low-bottom drunk to get sober. I know that my friend Phyllis is here. She's sitting, I think, somewhere right over there. There she is. And it's hard for me not to talk about step one and think about the first time I had never heard them before, but the first time I saw and heard Joe and Charlie. And they had said certain things. I was such a Joe and Charlie freak that I remembered that one of their favorite bars was Misty Dawn. Is that correct? Was it the Misty Dawn? Yes. Yeah. But I remembered they said some things from the podium that caught my attention about alcoholism. I remember one of them said he was at his high school dance. Now, I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic. And one of them said that he usually just leaned up against the wall at all these dances, and one night he got to drink some White Lightning. and he went and he asked a girl to dance, and the girl said, "I didn't know you danced." And he said, "I didn't know I danced either. Not until tonight. Not until I drank what I just drank." And I remember another story that they told of the highway patrolman that pulled over the couple driving home. And the highway patrolman said, "You know, you were going 75. And he said, "Nope, I was not. I was going 55. And the wife leaned over and said, "I told you to slow it down miles ago." And he said, "Just be quiet, mind your own business." And then the trooper said, "And you don't have your seatbelt on." And he said, "Oh, when I saw you pulling me over, I took my seatbelt off so I could reach and get into the glove compartment to get my registration and insurance card." And the wife chimed in and said, "I told you when we got in the car to put your seatbelt on." And he said, "Shut up and mind your own business." And then the trooper said, "Ma'am, does he always talk to you like that?" And she said, "Only when he's drinking." Like, I remember those stories like it was yesterday when I went and heard them. You know, and my love, I don't put them on a pedestal. I compare them. If you grew up in my generation or even older and listened to NPR, there was a show on NPR about cars called Car Talk with these two brothers, Click and Clack. Two just regular guys who knew cars, and, you know, they talked about it. And I am so grateful, so entirely grateful, because I get scared when people point to that shade and say that alcohol is only mentioned in the first step. As Joe and Charlie would say, that's if you're working an off-the-wall program. Then it is only mentioned in the first step, but not if you are taking someone through, especially the first 104 pages of the big book, where alcohol is mentioned all the time. Like I had to learn, it took me a long time, that for me there are only two kinds of people in the world. Maybe not for other people, but for me. And it's not Irish Catholic and everyone else, if you were thinking that. No, it's just simply, there are people who can drink and people who can't drink. I'm a person who can't drink. Unfortunately, for a good part of my life, I did what it says in the big book. I tried to prove with every form of self-deception that I am in the category of people who can drink. I am going to do whatever it takes to show you that I am in that category. It's why I always say when people say, "Oh, are you a friend of Bill's?" I always say, "Well, I am. But I'm more worried about whether you have an intimate friendship with Fred and Jim. Like, do you have a relationship with those two gentlemen, and more about alcoholism, because that chapter is so near and dear to my heart." I don't know. I know there's a lot of music fans here. Maybe not the type of music that I listen to. I know there are some. I don't know if there are any fans of Irish punk rock, particularly Shane MacGowan and the Pogues. But, you know, one of his most famous songs, you know, I saw them the first time in 1986, but one of his most famous songs starts off by saying, "It's Christmas Eve, babe. I'm in the drunk tank. An old man next to me said I won't see another one." Like that, those simple lines, that describes my life. And, you know, I am confident that when Bill and Bob were looking for new people, they were not walking down the street like looking and saying, "Oh, did you have a rough day today? You feel a little depressed today?" No. They were looking for drunks. They were looking for people who suffer from alcoholism. And I suffer from alcoholism very, very badly, actually. And, you know, I have the same story as a lot of other people. I needed to stop drinking because I need to stop drinking. Like, that's my story. Like, yes, I needed to stop drinking, but I needed to stop drinking because I needed to stop drinking. And when I look at those steps again, especially the assignment I have tonight, Step 3, Step 1, and Step 11, it's very easy to substitute other things in today's recovery world into those steps. The other ones you can just say, oh yeah, I have some problems, I need to do an inventory, I need to admit to God and another person, I need to make amends, I need to make a list, I need to. But the first step is about alcohol. And I love the description in the 12 and 12. That sometimes I think we act like this isn't a story today, but I'll just read it to you. And I'll just change it to me, to I. I have an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove from me. That's what it says in the book. It says, we have an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove from us. And what I love about that, because I've admitted publicly I had another problem when I came here that I didn't know about, that I made up my own definition of words just because it was my definition. That I had to learn that a dictionary is a very useful tool in Alcoholics Anonymous, because then we know what they're really talking about. And, if you look at providence, it's very clear. And I love that it's very clear on two ways, the way that Ebby talked about picking your own conception of a higher power. It's the protective care of God or nature as a superpower. That's what providence is. Like, that's all we have here. We don't have anything else. We're not fancy. We're not scientific. We're not mathematic. We're not medical. We have a way to lead you towards an act of providence. And whether you're a low bottom or a high bottom, I'll bring you into a little thing that I learned a long time ago, which is the program of recovery does not change based on whether you thought you were at a low or a high bottom. We welcome you if you got here a little early. If that's the case, welcome. But sometimes people confuse that they got here early with not having to do everything that everyone else needs to do. And that is deadly. It is really, really deadly. I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic. Not everybody has that story. I know a lot of people here that have that story. But my story is as much in the big book as anyone else's. I didn't need a different book. I didn't need a special book. Like, once I was able to get my head out of my ass, and once I was able to take directions from someone else, I was able to find my story in that book. In Bill's story, there's a lot of famous lines, of course, but one of them is, I had arrived. An arrival for me is an important thing to find in Alcoholics Anonymous. I wish that on any person. I hope that you find out when you arrived. Because for most of us, we arrived when we were drinking. Then we have that second surrender when we arrive when we're sober, which can almost be worse. But I'll talk about the original arrival. For me, that original arrival happened in the woods. It happened in the woods behind the neighborhood my parents lived in. And as been said already by some great speakers, I have the allergy and the obsession. Allergy gets twisted around a lot because if you read the book, the craving is only when alcohol is in my body. Nothing else. That's when I have the craving. But I have a lot of other things wrong with me. A lot. And I'll just name a few. You know what I love about that sound? I love about that sound is that they pick on us cigar smokers or cigarette smokers, but that's vapors. Vapors believe they can vape anywhere. So when you hear that going off, just know it's not the bad cigar smokers or cigarette smokers. It's the vapors who believe they have a view of the world like I do with a speed limit sign. Like that it says 55, but not for Billy, right? It's 55 for everybody else. Kind of like no smoking. Vapors have decided that they can vape anywhere. But We're in Las Vegas. We all know what that means, what's going on outside in the rest of the world in Las Vegas. And there's lots of people with lots of problems. I don't deny that whatsoever. We could list those problems that people have. Lots of people have them. They have anger problems. They have depression problems. They have food and eating problems. They have gambling problems. They have sex problems. They have relationship problems. I could go on and on. And I'll bet you with just the ones I mentioned, I could get 90% of the room to raise their hand and say, yep, I got one of those other problems. Some people have more than one. But the important matter to remember is we're not here for those problems. Like I had to explain to a family member of somebody who works for me recently on the phone, and this is why I love step one and working with others so much, is they called me and said, I need to get her somewhere where they can get to the root of her drinking. I said, okay, we would love that. I said, but I have to tell you something. If she is a real alcoholic, even if she gets to the root of her drinking, she can never ever safely drink again. That for us, drinking is lighting off a stick of dynamite. That we can't do it. As I fly a lot for work, and as I flew here Thursday, God provided. So I'm on that plane, and sitting in my seat, and the stewardess got on the microphone and said, good evening, everyone, or good morning. I just want to let you know, we have someone with a peanut allergy on the plane today. As such, we're not going to be serving any peanuts. And if you brought any peanuts with you, don't take them out. Keep them in their container. Leave them there. Now, I hear that announcement on average once a month, I would say, with the amount that I fly. About once a month. I hear that same announcement. No one ever gets mad. No one ever throws a hissy fit that peanuts aren't going to be served. No one's mad at the person who's causing the peanut ban. But I tell you that because I think about, what about if they said, good morning, everyone. Just want to let you know that idiot in 4B, yeah, he has an allergy to alcohol. So we're not serving any alcohol today. If you brought alcohol with you, keep it wherever you kept it, like keep it there. Like there'd be a riot in the plane. No one cares that I have an allergy to alcohol. No one cares about it. But that's how the outside world looks at us. It's so dangerous. That's why for newcomers, getting their families to understand really what is being powerless over alcohol and your life being unmanageable look like. It took me a long time because I thought for a while that a speaker had just made a story up because it sounded good. This is going back a lot of years. I said, wow, that's a funny story, but I'll bet you it's not real. And then I started my career. And I've had my career for a long time. And I go out to dinner a lot for work. And that story has come true in my life about how people don't understand the disease that I suffer from. Like very few people in the world really understand it. I didn't know that so many people were allergic to shellfish. I grew up in a blue-collar, middle-class home. No lobster, fish sticks. No lobster, frozen fish sticks, right? That's where I come from. But there's a lot of people, apparently, who are allergic to shellfish. And I've been to dinner after dinner where somebody says to the waiter, just want to let you know I have an allergy to shellfish. And the waiter says, okay. And everybody at the table is like, okay. Now, I've gotten to know people that I work with and travel with a lot, pretty well sometimes. And when you get to know them well, sometimes you tell them a little bit about why you don't drink or how you don't drink. And I've been at that dinner table with 2 or 3 people that I know well, and you tell them a little bit of your AA story. And when I say that I first went to my first AA meeting at 14 years old, I want to put my hand across the table. I want to cover their mouth. Because that speaker was right. People can't help themselves. They're like, 14 years old? You must have had a really rough childhood. They can't help themselves. The whole world wants to give us an external reason for our internal condition. The whole world. And you know what's sad about that? Going back to the shellfish guy or girl? You know what people don't say to them? Number one, I've been to hundreds of dinners with people with these shellfish allergies. Not one person ever says, wow, you must have had a rough childhood. Never. Not one time. And you know what else they don't say to the shellfish guy or girl? Maybe you could have one shellfish. They don't say that either. Ever. They just respect that if the person eats a piece of shrimp, they're going to be lying on the floor, convulsing. You know what else they don't say to the person with the shellfish thing? That they love to say to especially chronic teenage real alcoholics? They don't say, well, maybe you were going through a shellfish phase. There's no phase when it comes to the shellfish allergy. It's just you're allergic to shellfish. But with my allergy, oh, Billy, maybe you were just a troubled teenager. Maybe you were going through a phase. Like, I don't know what that means because, being very honest, I was 40 years old and 17 years sober when I found out, really, in my own crazy mind, that the rest of the world, get ready for this because it is devastating news, the rest of the world believes that 1 6-pack in a night is excessive drinking. I had no idea. I really had no idea that the regular world operated like that. Because I remember being 17 years old and being in my school psychologist's office because I made an agreement with the school that I would see him 1 hour a week. One day, he was a good guy, Dr. Pavi. And one day I thought, I'm going to be a good guy today too. So I looked at him like right in his eyes and I said, you know what, Dr. Pavi? I'm only going to have a 6 on Friday night and a 6 on Saturday night. I'm going to be good this weekend. At 17 years old, I work with people who think 3 beers is so over the top on a Wednesday night, it blows my mind. Like a 6-pack? Like that's like pre-gaming. Like when you wake up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and maybe get a fresh pack of cigarettes, right? And a big gulp because your throat is killing you from the night before. Like a 6-pack. But you see, that night in the woods, the truth is, and I come from an Al-Anon mother, and I know there's members of Al-Anon here, and I have the greatest respect in the world for the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups in Alateen. I do. But I'm a chronic, teenage, real alcoholic. That means that while your story may be that the worst thing for you is a belly full of booze and a head full of AA, that's not the worst thing for me. The worst thing for me is a belly full of booze and my mother's head full of crazy Al-Anon. That's the worst thing for me. When you are a chronic teenage alcoholic and your mother finds Al-Anon, it's life-changing, devastating. Because like you heard this morning, she got trained how to deal with crazy people. She got a first-hand new education. Like, don't let your son wake up all the other kids in the middle of the night. Tell your son, if you're not home by 12, come back at 8 in the morning. I remember when she told me that. She said, Billy, our house is going to be like a store. And I was like, Mom, what are you talking about? She's like, well, this lady at Al-Anon told me that I have a duty to take care of my other children. And they don't need to wake up at 3 a.m. with all your nonsense. Nonsense would be breaking in a window because I lost my keys. Nonsense would be stumbling into the bathroom to puke my guts out. Or, in my house, frozen pizzas, because I am a pre-microwave middle-collar family that couldn't afford a microwave, which means that when I stop in 7-Eleven to get a couple of tall boys for the ride home, I like to get a frozen pizza that I have to put at 350 bake for 12 minutes. But during that 12 minutes, I think I can get some sleep. And unfortunately, that 12 minutes is not as long as I thought it was. And then I wake up with the alarms going off and the house full of smoke. So my mother banned frozen pizzas, right? She learned that in Al-Anon too. But she told me about the time. She just said, no, we're like a store, Billy. If you forget to get something at night, you just can't go there at 10 o'clock at night and crash in the door or yell at the people who are closing up. No, you go back tomorrow morning. But you see, I'm a real alcoholic. So I would rather sleep out in 25-degree weather on my mother's back patio if it means I have to stop drinking. Like if the choice is stop drinking at 11:30 to get home or sleep outside, I'll sleep outside. I will. And while I know the allergy and obsession make me an alcoholic, I know from working with a lot of other people that we all have lots of other things in common. We just do. For me, some of those are, if you tell me not to do something, I'm going to do it. Like, that's been since a young boy, right? One of them is, if you tell me to do something without telling me a legitimate reason why I need to do it, I'm never going to do it, ever. If you tell me not to go somewhere, I'm going to go there. And probably the worst one of all, if you point at someone, and if we're going to the mall, and the bad kids are hanging out outside the mall, and my mother points at those and says, whatever you do, don't hang out with those people. Well, then I know they're the people God put on earth for me to hang out with, right? Like, those rules are pretty cross the board for me. So when that older kid came to me the summer before 7th grade and said, hey, Billy, we're going to have a party in the woods on Friday night. You should come. I've been dying for that invitation. Dying for that invitation. Now, if you witnessed what I witnessed in my house growing up, if there is such a thing as alcoholic math and 2 + 2 is 4, then based on what I witnessed, I would never drink. I don't come from a great family. I love my family, but I come from a violent, alcoholic household where wedding pictures get thrown in the middle of the night, where I'm not going to tell you as a 16-year-old boy that I would lock myself in my closet because my dad was a deep cover narcotics agent and I didn't want to hear his gun go off in the middle of the night, like maybe my mother finally had enough, or maybe he did something stupid. Like I knew all that, but I wasn't going to tell anybody. But witnessing all that, you would think I would never drink. I have 42 Irish Catholic first cousins. 42. It's like 4.5 kids a set of aunts and uncles, right? Not really a lot where I come from, right? But when you're Irish Catholic and you have 42 Irish Catholic first cousins, it means that every weekend is a revolving door of first communions, confirmations, graduations, birthday parties, Thanksgiving. So you're all gathered at some house. And in my family, they all end the same way. They end like a Cops episode. And you know what that looks like. There's a man and a woman on the front lawn. The woman's holding a baby in half pajamas, half daytime clothes. She's screaming at some guy. Like, that's how every one of them ends. So when people say, like, wow, you come from a dysfunctional family or you come from a functional family. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I think if the crazy or alcoholic family you come from, it would make sense that if you witnessed that with your own eyes, you would never drink. But that's not the case with me. Like when that kid said, hey, we're going to the woods on Friday night, I was told never to go to the woods. I was told not to hang out with those kids. But I couldn't wait to go to the woods. And I arrived that night. I've said it many times before. 4 things in particular. There was a bonfire in the woods. I'd never been to a bonfire. There was heavy metal music in the woods. There were girls, and there was alcohol. And the truth is, as pathetic as it sounds, by the day after that night, if the best my life ever got was a bonfire, girls, heavy metal music, and alcohol, that's all I needed. I didn't have any lofty goals. I didn't need to be really successful. But I didn't know what alcoholism was. I didn't know the difference between me and those other kids in the woods. Like I was in the woods, I was dressed the way I was today if you saw me during the day probably. I had an AC/DC t-shirt on, a thermal shirt under it, a pair of jeans. That's how I rolled as a teenager, And, I got put into all these special classes in 7th grade, junior high. And that's how I went to accelerated math and gifted social studies and honors English and all these other classes, because supposedly I was gifted. What a joke God had in store for me. Yeah, I was gifted, all right. Yeah, I was gifted with the most fatal progressive disease known to man. And then I would be in those classes, which I compare to big book studies, nothing personal against anybody. But I don't know if you've been to gifted classes, but it doesn't look like a fun crowd to hang out with in the woods, right? I mean, they have highlighters and a case for their pens and pencils, and a protractor, and a compass, and a 3-subject notebook that's properly labeled, they can't wait to learn. It's like going to your first Joe and Charlie Big Book Workshop. It's like everybody I hated in AA was in the hotel for 100 miles, with their highlighters and their dictionaries, and they can't wait to learn. But it didn't matter, because I didn't last long in those classes. See, there's a line in the Big Book that says, once you start learning about alcoholism, a lot of answers to questions you had about to your life will be answered. Like things that never made sense before. Things that make sense in here, but don't make sense outside. Like I was 17 years old, already 3 years in AA, unable to ever get barely, sometimes 90 days, barely, always in and out. But I couldn't understand the first drink got you drunk. And by the way, I don't want to be the big book thumper who comes to the podium and says, you people was hiding the big book from me. And contemporary AA was trying to kill me. And non-solution-based AA was trying to kill me. That's not my story. My story is when I was 15 years old, if I saw you get out of your car with a big book, I wouldn't talk to you. Like I knew you were one of you, the over-the-top Taliban in AA. Listen, I know the meeting has books. You don't need to bring your own book. And then you run into the people with the leather-bound books, with their initials, with the spot for the coin, and you can go on and on, right? I'm never going to talk to somebody like that, ever. I can't blame you that I didn't get sober. But I definitely knew at age 17 that the first drink didn't get me drunk. Like, how could you even call yourself an alcoholic? Like, I knew at 17 that the first shot after the 8th beer was my trouble. If I could just drink beers like everybody else, if I could just not do shots, I would be perfectly okay. But I hadn't learned yet that my body is different. That when I drink, something happens inside that doesn't happen to everyone else. And that, I joke around today when I talk to other people in the business world about what I say at parties or whatever, If someone asks me if I have a drink, I have the same answer today when I started my career. I've had enough. Like, I can say that if I lived for 6,000 or 7,000 years. Like, no thanks, I've had enough. Just leave it at that. But I also have this crazy mind. Like, I'm a blackout drinker, just to set that straight. However, I have like the alcoholic asterisk with blackout drinking. I can hear air go through the tube of a keg from like 100 yards away. Like if I'm in your parents' backyard and at 2 o'clock in the morning I hear that horrible sound, like, the keg was starting to float already in the ice water, but now that sound came. Like I can hear that air going through that keg hose from 100 yards. Now, I can't hear a siren right behind me trying to pull me over. But I can hear the air in the keg hose, And, my angel is a juvenile court judge. I wouldn't have called him an angel a long time ago. Somehow or another, and thank God I didn't know. I hadn't been institutionalized at the time, thank God. Because he gave me a choice. I had this thing called a PINS petition. Stands for Person in Need of Supervision. And so here I am. If you're a social worker in the audience, I just want to make a little disclaimer. I love social workers. I think you have an immensely important job in the community. But you're looking at a 57-year-old man that's never been invited to a social worker where I got good news. Ever. Like if there is a social worker in the room, I am not going to like what I'm about to hear. So I'm in this courtroom, and it's my mother, the juvenile prosecutor, a social worker, and a judge. And this judge was different than everybody else I had met in life. And I'm only 14 years old. See, I knew with the guidance counselor and the principal, I could say to them, you don't know what it's like to have a dad who's a deep cover narcotics agent, who's missing for days at a time, who comes home at 4 a.m, and I don't know if him and my mother are going to kill themselves or each other. Like I knew how to play the blame game as a good teenager early. But this judge, he didn't care. He said I had two choices. I could go to this contract for life he wanted to give me, where it would go on the refrigerator with one of my mother's stupid, like, Jesus magnets, And it would be behind the magnet, and it would say things like, Billy needs to bring the garbage out on Monday nights and come home before the lights go on outside during the week on school nights. And on the weekends, he needs to be home by 11:30. He needs to do his schoolwork. This judge was even smart. It said, I need to go to school and I need to go to class. Like he knew the difference. Like he knew teenagers. Like there were plenty of days I went to school and never went to class. Or he said he could make my life easy for me. He could put me in a juvenile correctional center where there was a school already there. And I wouldn't have to worry about being on time to school anymore. And I wouldn't have to worry about missing class. But I'm being honest with you about my alcoholism. At 14 years old, in case you happen to run into a teenager. Because it drives me crazy when people say teenagers can't be alcoholic. See, I'm institutionalized today. I have been institutionalized. I know that I'm not tough enough to go inside anymore. But I know I can get drunk at any prison or jail in America. I'm not worried about that. See, at 14 years old, progression had already set in my life, and I don't even like that word. Like, my progression is that by the time I was in 9th grade, the only thing I thought about on a Monday morning is, what are we doing on Friday night? And by the time I was in 10th grade, the only thing I thought about on a Monday morning is, I can't make it to Friday night. Friday night might as well be next summer. It might as well be next St. Patrick's Day. Like, maybe Wednesday, but preferably Tuesday, I need to drink. So I chose this stupid contract because I was afraid that they were going to send me someplace I can't drink. Now, Alcoholics Anonymous is an interesting place as a teenager. Alcoholics Anonymous is one of the most interesting places on earth, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's a line in one of our books that says, won't all kinds of odd people show up? Well, I have news for the person who wrote that line. It's no longer a question. Millions of odd people have showed up. Thank God. But, you know, I couldn't pick going somewhere I couldn't drink. I needed to drink. And I already knew that I was different. It's amazing, too. I'm sure some of you have had this experience. You go to a high school reunion. You meet other people that were in the woods listening to Sabbath with you. They actually go to 4 years of college in 4 years. They actually pay their student loans. They get a job. They go to work. They go to work on time. But they were in the woods with me. Like, it is so important to use this book to help people find out if they're an alcoholic. Because those steps are not an easy recipe. I mean, just think about when you were new. Did you really want to do any of that nonsense? Who? Not people who live like us. No way. But AA is filled with miracles. People say to me sometimes, Billy, what's the best miracle story you have in Alcoholics Anonymous? Truthfully, when I was a senior in high school, the hall lady caught me smoking, brought me to the principal's office. I got another week of detention, and 2 weeks after that, she gave me a Marlboro Red at an AA meeting on a Friday night. Like, where else in the world does that happen, right? Where else in the world can something like that happen? I went to my first anniversary meeting when I was 16 years old. I was still counting days. I didn't realize I had this allergy. I'm at this anniversary meeting because I had one way left I could manipulate my mother, which was my sobriety. I try not to tell young alcoholics who aren't done drinking that yet. But when you're a mother, I love something that Tom said earlier. See, I didn't realize until my mother was almost passed away. Like, Al-Anon mothers and fathers and parents, they would rather their kid locked up and they know where they are than not knowing. Like, I never realized what the not knowing did to my mother. When he talked this morning, like, I had chills. Like the not knowing takes years off of people's lives. It takes years off of people's lives. But I told my mother I had heard about this anniversary night. I said, it's a big deal, Mom. I need to go to anniversary night. And I went. And this old lady turned the lights down halfway. She was like 34 years old. This old guy brought a cake with candles on it. He was like 40. All these like people that looked like they went to church with my parents started singing happy anniversary or happy birthday. And I was thinking like 26, 36, 46, like, this is the end of my life. Like, this is my big night out. The last Friday night of the month. with the old lady who turns the lights down and the guy with the cake. Like, this is it. I have so much more to look forward to. Like, it is so crazy to suffer from this disease, and I didn't know. But what it says in this book, so many questions were answered. All of my questions were answered. You know, I tell new people all the time, there's a lot of bad places to get information if you're new. Outside the clubhouse where all the newcomers hang out, horrible place to get advice. The waiting room in the probation office, another horrible place to get advice. And probably the worst place to get advice is fellow students at DWI school. Horrible place to get advice. This guy told me once, he was like older than me, everybody was older than me. He's like, Billy, when you want to tone it down a little, just drink white wine spritzers. Now, this is before Bartles and James was even invented, right? I didn't even know what a white wine spritzer was. But you know what I know about them? Number one, you get vicious hangovers. Like the kind where you break ice on a towel and wrap up the ice and go back to bed. But the other thing I know about white wine spritzers is I can drink like 50 of them. Like, it doesn't matter what the alcohol is. It doesn't matter. And you know, when we talk about this mental obsession, and we talk about the 12 steps, which there's such great speakers here this weekend, we're not here to make perfect people. We're really not. If ever there was an imperfect group of people in the world, it's probably the members of Alcoholics Anonymous. However, the obsession is deadly. That obsession will kill me. That I believe that the only way to feel comfortable in my own skin is to light that stick of dynamite, to have the first drink. And that obsession that I suffer from, it tells me all kinds of things. It tells me I don't have the allergy. The allergy is hocus pocus. Like, that's crap, the allergy. I can have 6 beers. I'm here to tell you, I can't have 6 beers. What else can I tell you? When I'm drinking, the worse your idea is for what we should do that night, the more I like it. Okay? Just want to repeat that. When I'm drinking, the worst idea you whisper in my ear at like 10 o'clock at night, it's like the greatest thing I ever heard. When are we going to do it? Let's do it right now. That's how I drink. And this is before cell phones and before pagers. There was always something better going on someplace else. I remember one time, I love these podiums because, in the new world, I have a professional license in a bunch of states, and every once in a while you have to get fingerprinted if you want a new one. In today's world, it's very different. They have these beautiful electronic scanners. It's almost like it's nice. In the old days, in every police station, there was a podium like this. And it had the same slant. And it had a little board that went across the bottom. And they would squeeze out ink. And then they would really roll the ink across right in front of you. They would take your handcuffs off and they would ask you to keep one hand behind your back. Anyone like me, I'm sure there's a million people. If you have a professional license, it's kind of funny because when you go to the sheriff's department to get fingerprinted, they're like, wow, you've been fingerprinted before, because okay, it's thumbs, fingers, now we're rolling, all 4 together. Like, who knows that? Only we know that. The rest of the world, it's new to them. But I remember looking at a highway patrolman one night, and really, after blowing a .25, telling him, I'm the guy who drives everybody home. I'm the puke the next day guy. Like, I'm the guy who goes all night. And I think about those things like, wow, I had no idea what alcoholism is. And that's why when we downplay drinking, I get so worried. Like, I'm not here to promise anyone a rose garden or a yellow brick road. In fact, if you're like me and you got sober young, if you asked me to list my top 100 mistakes in life, I still wouldn't be to my drinking time, right? I'm still not drinking yet. Number 88. You gonna be drinking yet? Nope. 92. Still not drinking. Still in the top 100 mistakes of my life. But drinking is so not an option for us. And when we make it appear to people that you're guaranteed a return in the door, we're given a promise we can't deliver. Not the way I drink. The way I drink, if you're on this side of God's window, I need to do everything I can, everything, to remain on this side of God's window. And the reason the obsession is so important, it's because we don't want to be perfect people. We just need to keep that feeling away so that we don't think a drink is a good idea. I mean, I've lost too many people to this disease. I mean, way, way too many. And we talk about willpower all the time. But I love this definition of willpower. Willpower only works when the mind sees something wrong with what you're doing. Well, I have bad news. When I'm drinking, my mind never sees anything wrong with what I'm doing. In fact, when I'm drinking, the worse what I'm doing is, the more my mind says it's what I should be doing. It is insane. Really insane. And as we introduce people to the big book, I love the foreword to the second edition, because when people tell me, I don't want to be controversial, but when people tell me that if you have had your first step problem taken care of by Alcoholics Anonymous, that you can solve everybody else's other problems, I get worried. That since I have this experience with these other 11 spiritual steps, I'm an expert on everything. I'll help your gambling problem. I'll help your drug problem. I'll help your codependent problem. I'll help whatever. And it's become like cliche in AA to say, it doesn't matter what your first step problem is because I have the solution from steps 2 to 12. But that is not what it says in the book. The book says, this physician, meaning Dr. Bob, had repeatedly tried spiritual means, meaning the Oxford group, to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never had before. I know that corny saying, it only mentions alcohol in the first step, but I hate to break it to people, but it's like the first 45 pages of the book, depending on arguing about Roman numerals, about identification. The newcomer is not going to do any of that unless they know they have to. Unless they know that they are hopeless. They have to know they are hopeless. I had to learn I was hopeless. Now, I had that read about the community about you in the fellowship because I remember the night Buster Douglas beat Mike Tyson. It's a long time ago, right? I was 40-something days sober. Some stupid guy in AA got HBO at his house or Showtime to get the fight. They ordered pizzas and were playing poker, and I went. And I saw people having a good time. I saw people having fun. I saw people, their lives didn't look horrible. The corny saying, which I've grown to love, when people used to say it to me, I'd be like, yeah, that's stupid. But you can have one thing and lose everything else, or you can give up one thing and have the life you want. I know 2 months ago, I was sitting in Palm Springs, or standing, with an iced coffee in my hand, smoking a cigar, listening to Iron Maiden live, right? Like, if you told me that at 16 years old, that would happen to me again, I thought you wanted to rob my life. I thought you wanted to take everything away from me. If you drink like I drink, like I love to play quarters. I don't know if there's any other quarters players here. I love to play quarters. I love to bounce that quarter off your mother's kitchen table into a shot glass. I love it when the person who's this, it's like Survivor Island. There's one player left with you. And I love it when he's like the center on the football team and like 100 pounds more than me. And I love it when I'm like the last survivor, Like I love everything about drinking. I love playing softball when there is an ice-cooled cooler where the water is so cold that the labels are coming off the Budweiser glass, right? I'm just being honest. Like, that's how much I love drinking. But I'm in the bucket who can't drink. And if you're in the bucket who can't drink, you have to accept that the steps are the only thing here for us. Now, I want to finish by just going back to what I said to start. We have an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove from us. That's all we have here. It goes back to 1909. It goes back to Carl Jung carrying Freud's bags, going to get an award at Clark University in Massachusetts. Jung was a die-hard Freudian believer at that time. He was there to carry Freud's bags. And thank God, when you think about it, only 10 months before he died, he runs into William James. And William James tells him, people have been having vital, religious, or spiritual experiences since the beginning of mankind. And it's been making slave ship owners chaplains and criminals converted. It's been changing entire psychic changes. But William James told Carl Jung that unfortunately, they're as rare as getting struck by lightning. Well, I could tell you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, that that's the beauty of this book. See, this book, if you're a real alcoholic, is the instructions to get struck by lightning. Like they figured it out between 1935 and 1939. And in April of 39 published this great book. And so that act of providence, that getting struck by lightning, if you're a real alcoholic who suffers from the physical allergy and the mental obsession, that's it. For people like me, it's this book for fun and for free. And so the next time you walk outside into a parking lot, do what Bill did. Don't ask them how many DWIs they've had. Don't ask them if their kids just got taken away. Don't ask them if they just lost their job. Talk about you. Tell them your story. Tell them what happens to you when you drink. Let them, for the first time in their life, have the Me Too moment. That pamphlet, The Member's Eye View, there's a little statement in there that for the first time in the history of man, an alcoholic was not talked down to with parental disapproval. For the first time, another alcoholic told their story. And for the first time in their life, they heard the story of somebody who drinking affects them the exact same way. That's the exact instructions it lays out in working with others. So it's great to be here this weekend. Thank you.